So this is my procedure for using a digital dial indicator to measure the deck height or squish height of this engine. What I'm measuring is the distance between the bottom of the head button and the top of the piston, the most accurate method that I know of. So what it's going to start with is I'm going to take off the button. I'm going to zero the indicator on the tabletop. Then I'm going to install the button on the engine, tighten it down. Then I'm going to put the engine to top dead center, and then I'm going to drop the indicator down and see what the difference is, because what will happen is this button's bottom will be the zero surface for when I set the indicator. So what's going to happen is when we put it all back together again, the indicator, when we measure it with the button tightened down on the engine, the indicator is going to show us the height differential between the top of the piston at top dead center versus the bottom of the button. This is the most accurate way you can use to measure your head clearance. The only caveat to this is that this only really works with a flat top piston engine like an OS Speed or some of the Novarossis, the Piccos, or the Reds. When you get into domed pistons like some of the Novas, this method will not work. It would work if we had a cheat sheet, so we knew exactly from the center measurement of the piston where it would relate to the true piston height at the outer edge, which is what we're worried about. So maybe sometime down the road I can get that measured by somebody who has a little better equipment than I have, and we could get a little chart to work from. Then this method would work great too. What I'll say about this is it's very important to know your engine's deck height and to take the time to measure it and set it, because an awful lot of performance can be found by simply setting the deck height. Like this OS engine, it's one of the fastest in its class. Big reason is they've got the tightest head clearance of all the manufacturers. So it makes their engines really strong. They run really strong. Makes them use a touch more fuel. But that's why these speeds are so fast. This is the new LRP ZZ21 Spec 3. I'm just doing a little demo with it to show you how I do the head clearance, but really, really nice engine. So keep your eye out for this one here. I think you're going to see a lot of it. Basically the same engine as before, except now it's got a narrower crank bore. So what it's going to do, it's going to give the engine a little more throttle response, it's going to be a little bit better on fuel, but it might give up a tiny bit of top end. Talking to the drivers though, nobody's noticed any loss of top end, and besides, most people run these with 6.5 and 7mm inserts anyways, so that effect of the narrow crank isn't going to come into play at all because you're already restricting it at the carburetor. So great move by LRP, really good update, still stays the same, speed spec 2 platform. Everything's the same other than that crank bore, and I don't know, I think it's going to be a winner. I think that crank bore is going to make it a real nice little buggy engine and improve the runtime a little bit. So very, very nice. Okay, I will zero out the button. Just wiggle it around a little bit, make sure you get it perched in there properly, and zero. And just hit that again. And, that last digit might wiggle around a tiny bit if you don't get it squared. Here we go. Okay, another thing to show you. I have at the bottom of this indicator, I got it, there's usually like a little tapered cone that threads into the bottom. I've removed that so I can meet the minimum requirement here, because with that tip on here, this doesn't compress quite enough to measure the button depth. It's just a little too long, so I take it off, and it works fine either way, but that's why I do that. Okay, we're going to put the button on. top dead center. Since I've already zeroed this to the head button, so tell us our dimension between the head button and piston. So this new LRP ZZ21 Spec 3, it's got 0.37 millimeter between the piston and the button, and if I alter it, it's 14.5 thousandths. So no wonder these OS-based engines are so fast. That's pretty tight and really aggressive squish. So yeah, it kind of explains a few things. So I'll show you a little trick that I do here. When I take these apart, a little tool that I use for pulling the connecting rod off the crank pin. So let me just remove the button on there. So, being an OS engine, this is actually pretty easy to take off, but I want to show you what I'll do sometimes if you get a tricky engine and you don't have the tools to have a custom-made tool. You can use a dog bone from an HPI Savage or really any other truck that has sort of one of this style of dog bone. And what you do is you tuck it in there right behind the top dead center. You tuck the little pin in behind the connecting rod and pop. And that's it. Your piston's out. Simple as that. So a little trick to teach you, if you're pulling apart an engine and you're having a hard time getting the connecting rod out, one of these works really well in a pinch. It's quite good. So what else I'd like to show off is my new break-in bench prop adapter. This is something that you would use either with the Huddy break-in stand or if you've made yourself your own homemade break-in stand. This here will allow you to fit any traditional RC airplane propeller, one with this sort of size, and it's really good. It works really, really well. I have this made so we have enough extension between the propeller and the engine that you can run a normal full-size air filter while you're doing your break-ins. One of the big complaints I have about the Huddy system is that it works really well, except there's no room for a air filter. So, if you ever, have the off chance you got some dust in the air or somebody kicks up some dirt, it very well could get sucked in that engine. I mean, there is nothing stopping it, and there's a lot of movement there. So I like this much better. We can put an air filter on it. We know we're for sure safe. And the other advantage of this too is that the Huddy uses a really small propeller. It peaks your engine out somewhere around 21 to 24,000, which is okay, but it's a little bit of a high RPM for a break-in. So by being able to use different propellers, I've taken this propeller here, which starts as a 9x8, and it's been trimmed down, and I've used an acoustic tachometer to set the RPM of this. On an average engine, an average race 21, we see 16,000 RPM. On a really strong 28 or on-road engine, I'll see 19,000 RPM. And this is at full power, full tune, with heat added and extra oil in the fuel. And it works really well. I mean, it lets you put a lot of load on the engine, but yet it keeps your RPM lower, so you don't have any risk of scuffing your piston. I can tune this propeller to a lot of different RPMs. I mean, we could stall the engine down to 12,000 RPM if we wanted. It would be no problem. We could either leave a bit more blade on this, or we could start with a little bit bigger propeller. And if you did want a custom propeller, you wanted something, like different than what I'm offering, just give me a call and I'll customize your propeller to suit the RPM you're looking for. And you know, if you wanted to be really particular, you could have a series of propellers from a very big one for the initial part of the break-in, and then as you you know, work the engine in, you start using a smaller and smaller propeller, allowing the engine to gradually work itself up in RPM, all the while being at full throttle and full load. So I'm a big believer in break-ins done this way. I find that when the piston is fully loaded and the engine has heat on it, you get the proper expansion in the piston and sleeve, and you're wearing it in under conditions very close to what it's going to see out on the track. So I've typically had very good results with engines lasting a long time that I've done the break-ins on, and I would attribute it to this. Bones break-in fuel works very well too, so we'll give it its due as well. But yeah, I've broken in hundreds of engines on this exact setup here, and decided to start selling them. So anyways, here it is.